So Heidegger begins his memorial address. He's in a very common situation. It's a small town in Germany. It happens to be his hometown. There's an ordinary occasion. They have another of their famous citizens is a well-known composer, and they decide to have a celebration of that composer's life. The mayor of the town understands that a famous professor has written an article, published something about that composer, and so invites him to give a talk. All very ordinary business. At the same time, one might wonder what Heidegger would do in that situation. You could say perhaps he's in the wrong place. He's not a music critic or a music historian. What can he add to this celebration? Heidegger himself says on page 44 that the music in a way takes care of itself, that the greatness of the composer is there plainly in the notes and doesn't need something else to reveal it. But Heidegger solves this problem of not having an obvious thing to do, by practicing what he calls meditative thinking, what he will call meditative thinking later in the talk. That is, he stops to ask himself, what is an occasion like this for? What are we doing? He could perhaps solve his problem by calculative thinking. If he gives his talk and gets his standard level of applause, maybe a little more, if the people are entertained, if perhaps the mayor is pleased that his polling numbers go up because people enjoyed this celebration, that, according to calculative thinking, which looks forward to concrete results, would say that the occasion was a success. So you could rate it that way, but Heidegger uses his own standard, which is more meditative, which in a simple way simply means that he stops to ask, what is such an occasion for? What would I be doing? What good can come out of it? And as always, Heidegger doesn't start with a clever or deep or uncommon explanation. He starts with the most obvious things. What is a memorial address for? Well, it's for remembering, for commemoration. It's a kind of thinking. Who was this man? What was his life? What did he contribute? So it's a thinking and remembering back. And why are they doing it? Well, not only was he a successful composer, but he was from here. He came from this town, so he's one of our community. And the Heidegger begins to dwell. He dwells on those things and begins to bring out the underlying assumptions of them. And this will ultimately lead him to the quote that ended the introduction lecture, that a composer or any artist who creates a flourishing work of the human spirit should come from somewhere, should be rooted, that the flower has a stem and the stem leads down to roots, so that the good work as a human being comes not simply from being from anywhere, but being from somewhere, and should be appreciated most naturally and best by the people who are also from there. So Heidegger asks himself, what is it one does at a memorial address? Well, one remembers, which is a kind of thinking. One reflects on the meaning of a life. And what is it to think or reflect? Well, we could say, again, one hardly needs Heidegger for that. It's people are thinking all the time. They seem to be thinking in a stronger way, more powerfully than ever before. Do we really need a professor of philosophy to help us think? It seems that the modern ages are the most knowledgeable, and one would think, therefore, the most thoughtful ever. But Heidegger rejects this thought and plays with the opposite. Perhaps we're the most thoughtless generation. Let's see here on the bottom of page 44, Heidegger says that people do not think as much. In a certain way, I think people do not think as much in modern ages, and even people like himself, he says somewhat pointedly, people who think professionally and people who get paid to be philosophers, paid by universities to be philosophers, perhaps even they are not thinking. On page 45, so the middle paragraph, he makes an important point in the development of this argument, that it's particularly the human thing to think things through, and that not thinking is a conspicuous absence. So he says a field can be, to use technical vocabulary, fallow. Nothing's growing in it. And that's a condition that can happen because it's a field. It's meant to have things growing in it. The middle of the road is not fallow, even though nothing grows there, because it doesn't have the ability to have anything grow. It's not set up for that. But human beings are set up to think, and if we're not doing it, then that's a particular problem. And this is much on his mind, says he's gone from just thinking to himself, what am I doing at this memorial address? What am I for? I'm to think and to remember what's significant about that. Well, the significance is, according to this paragraph here on the bottom of page 45, that we in the modern age, as brainy as we are in flight from thinking. We've neglected or rejecting it. And now, how does that happen? Well, it's because not because we don't think, but because we're especially concerned with thinking of another kind. So here on page 46, he makes the one of the more important distinctions of his address. He says there are two kinds of thinking, and one is the calculative. And you can read his words. The important thing is to run them through your own understanding and imagination, and not simply to be able to repeat his words, but to consider whether this is a distinction that seems to make sense and whether you see it in your own life. What is calculative thinking? Well, it's the kind that looks forward and makes plans and is particularly concerned with a reckoning or calculation, counting things. So you might think perhaps about your own education, that AUIS wants to prepare you for a certain career and get you ready. How much of that education is dedicated to helping you think about what you want to do and why it would be good or bad and what the ultimate result of it would be? And how much is meant for taking forward steps just to making you ready, not asking what difference it makes. If you're an IT major, not asking what difference it makes that we have these machines which are more and more involved in every aspect of his life, not asking what that means, not asking whether what it would mean for your life to spend most of your productive time concerned with them and working to make them stronger and better and more efficient. And so how much of your education is about that kind of thoughtfulness and how much is about a more calculative kind of thoughtfulness, just to get you ready to do more and more, to solve every problem that comes up, rather than asking what the meaning and importance of solving that particular problem with those particular tools is. So I think probably you can recognize that most of your education is calculative, that the university as an institution, because it's following the way that societies do things, helps you move forward in an efficient way to achieve your goals, and does not slow you up by making you reflect backwards are helping you to think more deeply about what those goals mean. The way we might understand calculative thinking is to think about the way that we do politics these days. That just to pick up on one thing, think of how very little politics gets done these days without polling, and how much better our polling is than past ages. That because we do it at all, and because we do it in such a sophisticated way, we keep moving forward to get better and better at getting accurate answers and making good predictions. But polling tends to blur the distinction between people's opinions and people's true opinions. That we know better and better from polls what people think, but whether they should think it and why they think it tends to be lost. We close the circle in politics. That we think of it more and more as success when polling numbers go up, so that we close the circle, and in the sense that politicians appeal to the public, and if the public respond, and some central substance, some real thing is forgotten. If the politician is popular, that must be a good politician. So this is an example of calculative thinking, and the way that its success shuts out the alternative, that meditative thinking. But now, this distinction brings up another problem for Heidegger. And the first one he faced is that if I'm here to think, then I seem to be behind the massive amounts of thinking that go on in our age. It's driven by scientists and the professions. And he addresses that by talking about calculative thinking. But then he has to face the charge that perhaps his sort of meditative thinking is irrelevant, above what he says the ordinary understanding. That perhaps it's high flown, that has nothing to do with common sense. Now, he answers that mostly by what he's doing, what he's done in order to address the situation is simply to ask himself in the most straightforward way, what am I doing? What kind of occasion is this? Why do people do it? He's somewhat addressing this challenge by showing the opposite. There's nothing that ordinary people cannot understand in his talk, and nothing that he says that common people with common understanding can't follow, and yet it will lead them to a deeper sort of reflection than we're used to.